In a past life, my personal maid Lu Yun had an illicit affair with her cousin. Kneeling before me, she begged for my blessing. I dissuaded her. If he truly cherished you, he would save silver to buy your freedom, then marry you through proper betrothal and formal wedding rites. Why would he deceive you into secret trysts? She remained silent for a long while before bowing her head. Thank you, miss, for your kind words. Soon after, word came that the cousin had been taken in as a son-in-law by the widow of a herbalist. I comforted Lu Yun. He truly was unworthy of trust. Rest assured, I will find you the finest match. Later, at a spring banquet where noble ladies gathered, Lu Yun served me food. A scroll of erotic paintings slipped from her sleeve and fell onto the mat. She cried out before everyone, "Miss, I begged you not to bring such things out." My reputation was ruined in an instant. Father confined me to my quarters. Stepmother Lady Lin seized the chance to strangle me, claiming the Xie family daughter had died of a sudden illness. Under Lady Lin's protection, Lu Yun departed safely for the estate. Before leaving, she helped Lady Lin empty Qingyi Pavilion. That night, Lady Lin lit 2 tall red candles. Before a bronze mirror, she tried on each of my mother's heirlooms, testing them all night long. These were things she had coveted since her youth. Later, I was reborn. In the familiar boudoir, Lu Yun knelt before me once more, begging me to grant her permission to elope. I replied calmly, "Rise." How could I refuse to grant your wish? Early spring brought a lingering chill, and a brass brazier still warmed the chamber floor. Lu Yun knelt, her voice quivering with sorrow as she bowed her head repeatedly, tears falling like broken pearls. "Mistress, for the sake of all these years I've served you faithfully, please grant me this favor." I sat on the couch, my index finger pressed against my brow, gazing down at her coldly. In my past life, she had knelt before me in the same way. That year, when winter snow still lingered, she hid in a hollow behind the garden rock to meet secretly with her cousin, Wang Qing. An innocent, clumsy little maid stumbled upon their tryst. The illicit lovers parted hastily. Wang Qing darted out of the garden like a streak of lightning. Lu Yun, however, could not escape. The Xie household was ruled by my stepmother, Lady Lin, who loathed any hint of impropriety among the maids. The slightest whisper would prompt her to summon the slave dealer and sell the offender away. Lu Yun lived in constant dread, losing her appetite and barely rising from her bed. I secretly sought doctors and medicine for her, but nothing helped. One early morning, she received a letter from home. After reading it, she struggled to her feet, knelt before me, and told me the whole story. I resented her foolishness, but seeing her face flushed crimson with tears, I couldn't bring myself to be harsh. After my mother passed, she had always cared for me, gentle and dependable, like an older sister. So I said earnestly, "Rest assured, if word leaks out, I'll protect you at any cost. But you mustn't be foolish anymore. If he truly cared for you, he'd save silver to buy your freedom and marry you properly with formal betrothal. Why would he deceive you into illicit relations?" Lu Yun shook her head and smiled bitterly. "Miss, it's not that he's stingy. He's worked at the herbalist's shop for 3 years and should have saved money. But the shop wanted to marry their daughter to him, and my cousin refused outright. That's why he's been owed 3 years' wages." I was secretly amazed. What kind of extraordinary man is this cousin Wang Qing, that the herbalist shop is so desperate to have him join their family? Lu Yun said that in his letter, her cousin begged her to elope with him. If he didn't see her at the back gate by midnight, he would jump into the well to prove his resolve with his life. After pondering it, I still felt it was unwise, so I persuaded Lu Yun to wait a little longer. Lu Yun seemed impatient and worried. I reassured her that if we stationed someone by the well outside the back gate, we could verify whether her cousin's threat was genuine. If he truly attempted to jump, we could catch him mid-fall and prevent him from losing his life. The maid Lu Yun chimed in, suggesting her younger brother, who was on duty at the second gate, could take on the watch. Lu Yun remained silent for a long while before bowing her head. "Thank you, miss, for your thoughtful concern." That night, none of us slept, watching as the faint glow of dawn spread across the horizon. Early the next morning, Lai Bao, shivering and clutching his hands to keep warm, complained to his sister Lu Wen, "It was my day off, yet I stood guard by the well all night. If someone had come, it would have been worth it. But not a soul, not even a ghost, showed up." Lu Yun heard this but said nothing. A few days later, news arrived that cousin had been taken in by the herbal medicine shop as a son-in-law, becoming its new proprietor. Ironically, he married not the 16-year-old maiden, but a 36-year-old widow. Lu Yun fell ill the moment she heard the news. Sitting by her bedside, I urged her to take her medicine. He truly proved unworthy of your trust. Rest assured, I will find you the finest match. Later, when she recovered, she insisted on accompanying me to the spring banquet. It was my first public appearance since becoming betrothed to the young master of the Wei household. By the riverbank, willows were green and plum blossoms red, while noble ladies gathered in clouds of laughter and chatter. As the feast began, Lu Yun served me dishes with a smile, then suddenly flicked a scroll of erotic paintings onto the table before everyone. Amidst the stunned silence, she threw herself to the floor, wailing, "Mistress! I begged you not to bring such things out." The crowd erupted. My father, disregarding propriety, strode over and hauled me into the carriage. Before the curtain fell, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a cold smile on Lu Yun's lips. It felt like plunging into an ice cave. She hated me. Even if it cost her life, she would drive me to ruin. Now, Lu Yun knelt before me, repeating the same words. "Miss, his feelings for me are genuine. We played together since childhood. Though we lost touch for years, when I returned home last year, my cousin told me he's delayed marriage all this time because of me. Now he's fallen ill for my sake, his days numbered. I beg you, miss, let me go. Grant us our wish." Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Whether his illness is real or feigned, dragging his cousin into a drafty, freezing ice cave for illicit trysts in this bone-chilling weather, if he dies of it, he deserves it. I lazily flipped through a few more pages of my book. The stone floor was icy cold. If she wished to kneel, let her kneel longer. Having been reborn, I felt no pity for her anymore. She wasn't worth it. She coughed up another mouthful of bloody phlegm. My legs grew numb from sitting, so I said, "Get up quickly." "Why wouldn't I grant your wish?" Lu Yun, overjoyed, scrambled to her feet. She went to the dressing mirror to arrange her hair, then swept past the curtain like a gust of wind into the outer room. A crisp, sharp voice rang out from behind the curtain. "I've only been ill for a few days, yet you're already so lazy. If I ever leave this place, how will you neglect the young mistress?" I called from the inner room, "Lu Yun, come here. I have something to tell you." "What is it, miss?" she asked, her face full of concern. I frowned. "Where's the pink gemstone crown my grandmother sent me last year? Find it quickly. I need it for the spring banquet." Lu Yun looked flustered. "It's a precious item, stored away securely." "I'll retrieve it when you need it, miss." I insisted. "Find it. And while you're at it, bring out that crimson feather-embroidered cloak and the white fox fur coat with embroidered patterns." Lu Yun paused, then smiled. "Very well, miss. I'll fetch them." She summoned several maidservants, directing them to bring down the trunks but forbidding them to touch anything. Rolling up her sleeves herself, she began a meticulous, unhurried search. After a while, she looked up and said thoughtfully, "Miss, please go have your meal first. There's no rush for these things." Those items weren't in the room at all. She was stalling for time to redeem them from the pawn shop. In my past life, I trusted her too much, never suspecting the camphor scent on the clothes. How could ordinary household trunks infuse garments with such a strong odor? Only pawn shops, with their mixed goods, would use such potent chemicals to prevent moth damage and avoid losses. Lu Yun pawned my belongings, used the money for usury, and amassed quite a nest egg. Without that cash, she couldn't have bribed the gatekeeper to sneak my cousin in unnoticed. I slammed my hand on the table, my voice icy. "Lu Yun, it seems your body may be here, but your heart has long since departed. You can't even handle such a simple task. If you don't find it today, I'll hold you accountable. Surely no little rat carried off my things?" She immediately adopted a look of grievance. "Miss, how can you say such things? You're wronging your servant." In the past, whenever she wore that expression, I'd yield to her every demand. Now, that tactic of feigning retreat to advance had lost all effect. I slammed down my teacup, my voice icy. By the time I return from my meal, these items should be displayed. Otherwise, Chinny Pavilion will be deemed harboring thieves, and I'll investigate thoroughly. I always dined with my stepmother, Lady Lin. Upon entering her chambers, I curtsied and addressed her as mother. She smiled warmly. "Come sit, child. I've warmed wine for you. Drink and warm yourself." Though only 35, Lady Lin dressed plainly as the household matriarch, her furnishings neither new nor old. Yet she doted on me excessively. The latest hairpins, ornaments, and garments flowed into Chinny Pavilion like a river, unceasing through all seasons. My sisters within the clan envied me endlessly, saying this stepmother surpassed a birth mother. Had I not died once, I would never have known the cruel heart hidden beneath her kind motherly face. Lady Lin was my mother's cousin by marriage. In her childhood, her grandfather became embroiled in an examination cheating scandal. He died of illness in prison, and the family fortune declined thereafter. My mother pitied this cousin. Before her own marriage, she often pleaded with grandmother to invite her over to play. Later, when mother married, Lady Lin's own marriage was delayed indefinitely due to her lack of dowry. When mother fell gravely ill, Lady Lin tended to her bedside, administering medicine and never leaving her side. On her deathbed, mother pleaded with father to take her cousin as a second wife. Father agreed. After the marriage, Lady Lin remained childless. A woman of exceptional virtue, she personally arranged for father to take 2 concubines, yet still bore no children. She showered me, her only daughter, with boundless affection. If I asked for the stars, she would give them. If I asked for the moon, she would have given it willingly. When I fell ill, she knelt before the Buddha, reciting sutras through the long night. Had she never had the chance to harm me, had she sustained such devotion to the end, perhaps the false would have become true. A year ago, on my coming-of-age ceremony, she joyfully mentioned that a nephew from her family had just passed the provincial exams as a scholar, with a promising future ahead. Father snorted coldly. How could a young lady from the Xia household be matched with a penniless scholar? You've seen some wealth and status in your life, your eyes are far too shallow. This matter is closed. Never speak of it again. Likely his family offered you some advantage. Dismiss their hopes at once, and forbid their household from visiting ours. Madame Lin hastily waved her hands. Nothing of the sort. How could I? But father had already swept his sleeve aside and departed, leaving her standing there, her face flushed crimson with shame. I sat nearby, deeply uneasy. Father's contemptuous neglect of Lady Lin was plain for all to see. Her role as mistress of the house was no easy one. That day, after stewing in embarrassment for a while, Lady Lin turned to me with a forced smile. Tanger, don't blame your mother. I was too abrupt. My dear Tanger possesses unparalleled grace and beauty, with a lavish trousseau. She deserves a husband of noble lineage and noble character. After speaking, she gazed out the window with a lonely look. Outside, willows swayed in the slanting sunlight, the courtyard empty and quiet. Later, I became betrothed to the young master of the Wei household. His family background was excellent, and he was exceptionally talented. Families with daughters throughout the capital had long set their sights on him. Yet this splendid match had fallen to me. On the day of the betrothal banquet, father drank himself into a stupor. Tears streaming down his face, he said, "This child is pitiful, losing her mother so young. Now that her future is secured, even if I were to kick the bucket today, I could face my late wife with peace." He whispered to me, "At the spring banquet's horse race, the young master of the Wei household will ride a snow-white horse with hooves as white as snow. My daughter, just glimpse the rider's gallant form, and you'll understand how deeply your father has cared for you." I dressed in my finest, joyfully attending the banquet, only to make a public spectacle of myself. Father confined me to Chinny Pavilion, personally rushing to the Wei residence to apologize and break off the engagement. He wanted to save my life. In recent years, morals had declined, and people's hearts had grown cold, treating women with increasing harshness. Once a woman's reputation was tarnished, her clan often forced her to take her own life. As a betrothed woman, my status hovered between being a Xia family daughter and a Wei family wife. Father had a stubborn temperament, and the Xia family couldn't control him, but the Wei family was another matter. That was why he was so eager to call off the engagement. That very night, Lady Lin came to see me bearing white silk and a dagger. She wept and sobbed, "Your father has been driven to unconsciousness by your actions. The Xia clan elders say that unless you atone with your life, none of the other Xia daughters can live. Child, choose one." I glared at her, refusing to be swayed by her manipulation. She wiped away her feigned tears and coldly clapped her hands. A figure darted out of the shadows, wrapping the white silk tightly around my neck. Madame Lin laughed maniacally. "Cousin Shirong, I'm sending my precious daughter to reunite with you now." She killed me, claiming I had died of shame. When my father returned from the Wei residence and saw the courtyard draped in mourning banners, he went mad. Some urged Lady Lin to have Lu Yun killed to eliminate future trouble. She countered that if Lu Yun died too, the spectacle would be too great, no one would believe the young mistress had died of a sudden illness. If Liu Yun's family stirred up trouble with the authorities, that would be even more troublesome. In the end, Lu Yun was sent to the estate to be watched over, sparing her life. Madame Lin locked the door from the inside, lit 2 tall red candles, and spent the entire night trying on each of my mother's heirlooms before a bronze mirror. "Tanger, why are you so lost in thought? Is the food not to your liking?" Madame Lin's concerned voice pulled me from my recollections. I lifted my head to find her gazing intently at me, her eyes deep and penetrating. I shook my head and smiled. Mother's cooking is always the most delicious. I only blame myself for indulging in 2 pastries this morning. Then refrain from eating now. Have the kitchen prepare something when you feel hungry later. Madame Lin smiled affectionately, drawing me into her embrace. Her hand casually brushed against the white jade pendant hanging at my chest. This was my mother's keepsake. As she stroked it with such deliberate intent, a chill rose from the depths of my heart. Suddenly, a thought struck me. After all, Lu Yun was an unmarried girl. That scroll of erotic paintings must have been given to her by Lady Lin. She was merely a pawn, not the mastermind. She knew Lady Lin would shield her, ensuring she wouldn't die. I hated her to the core, but dealing with her was truly tricky. Beating her to death was out of the question. Our dynasty's laws allowed masters to sell their servants, but not to kill them at will. Poisoning or strangling her was equally impossible, the coroners weren't fools. Leave her to suffer? If she started screaming about the Xia family's unmarried daughter mistreating servants, Lady Lin would have another handle to use. Better to grant her wish and let her go with that cousin. Even if she endured 1,000 torments, none would be laid at my door. With that thought, I spoke up. "Mother, Lu Yun is getting old. I wish to send her back to find a husband on her own, without demanding any compensation. Is that acceptable?" Madame Lin, ever compliant with my wishes, though slightly surprised, smiled and replied, "Very well, mother agrees. In a few days, I shall select another capable servant for Tanger." With that settled, I returned to Qingyi Pavilion with Lu Wen and the others. Lu Yun hurried back, sweat still beading on her forehead. Leaning against the table, she stared blankly at the few belongings. Going to redeem them at the last minute must have cost a pretty penny. Seeing me return, she forced a smile and said, "Miss, please take a look. Are these the ones?" I glanced at them and said, "I've already spoken to Mother on your behalf. The maidservant will bring your indenture shortly. Hand over the keys to your trunks to Lu Wen properly, and then you may leave." Lu Yun nodded, her eyes fixed on me expectantly. By custom, when a long-serving servant departs, the master should present parting gifts, that is the proper way. But I went straight to my afternoon nap and dispensed with her farewells. When I awoke, Lu Yun was gone. Warm sunlight filtered through the gauze window as Lu Wen quietly worked at her needlework. The room was serene and peaceful. Dying once had its benefits, it allowed one to see people clearly. Lu Wen was a peasant girl. Years ago, to save her ailing widowed mother, she and her brother voluntarily sold themselves into the Xia household, holding hands as they entered. She was diligent but often rash, frequently earning scoldings from Lu Yun. In her past life, when someone inquired about the sordid details of her scandal, she would darken her face and remain silent. If pressed too hard, she would spit viciously and call them a pig. Yet in secret, she would quietly offer paper money to pay her respects to me. A drop of kindness deserves a spring of gratitude. Envoys from the Wei household arrived to discuss advancing the wedding date with father. The representative was an elder of impeccable character, bearing lavish gifts. His words were humble and earnest, reasonable and just, so father agreed. Madame Lin, however, wore an anxious expression. As soon as they left, she began complaining, the dowry items aren't even fully prepared yet. The way households behavior is utterly discourteous. Master, in my opinion, they hold us in no regard. This match is better off called off. Father shot her a cold glance and said, we CF family members hold ourselves with dignity and self-respect. There's no need for such petty suspicions. Do not speak of breaking off the engagement lightly. A few days later, 2 distant cousins arrived at the manor. They said they had traveled by water, sailing with favorable winds, and thus arrived ahead of schedule. Madame Lin's earlier agitation vanished instantly. She hurriedly pulled me to meet the guests. One, named Linger, was graceful and gentle, the other, Ruer, was lively and cheerful. Though both wore coarse cloth garments and no adornments, their features were remarkably lovely. That evening, Madame Lin pulled me into her room and coaxed me with heartfelt sincerity. These 2 sisters come from humble families and are the most sensible and well-behaved. When the time comes for them to marry alongside you, they will be your right-hand women. Even if they bear a son or daughter before you, you may claim them as your own. My dear Tanger, you must not be like those petty, jealous girls who cannot tolerate others. It suddenly dawned on me. So what she had been worrying about not having time to prepare were these 2 carefully selected beauties. I had no words to counter. Filial piety outweighs heaven. As long as she hadn't married off, her status as my mother held sway over me. Knowing full well these 2 were troubles she deliberately sought out for me, I still had to smile and say, thank you, mother. I wasn't sitting idly by. These past days, I'd sent Lewin to secretly investigate within the mansion, hoping to catch Lady Lin off guard. Lewin had secretly claimed 2 godmothers and distributed numerous gifts. Yet Lady Lin spent her days managing household affairs and reciting sutras in the Buddhist hall. When her good-for-nothing younger brother came begging, she avoided any appearance of impropriety, dismissing him with a few taels of silver through Steward Sue. She was a proper and dignified matriarch, beyond reproach. I took a carriage to my maternal grandmother's house to clear my mind. Passing through the bustling marketplace, the crowd's clamor blocked the intersection. Wang's general store had just opened, and people were waiting for the shopkeeper to distribute dried fruits and pastries to share in the festive cheer. Lewin pushed her way through the crowd and returned excitedly, Miss, this shop is run by Lu Yun and her cousin. It's right next to the herbal medicine shop where her cousin used to work as an apprentice. Someone exclaimed loudly, that Wang family lad is truly remarkable. He only worked under Madame Chen for 3 years as an apprentice, and now he started his own business and built a home. Another person added, it's all thanks to Madame Chen's generosity. The shop belongs to her family, but she said they wouldn't charge rent for now and would settle accounts at year's end. The first man chuckled, scratching his head. If I had his Panan looks, even the herbal shop would bear my surname. Ah, but who can blame the goddess Nuwa for not paying attention when she molded us? I lifted the curtain and saw a fair-faced young man directing his assistants. His almond-shaped eyes drifted intermittently toward the neighboring herbal shop. The widow, Madame Chen, was dressed in a provocative manner, her long eyebrows sweeping into her temples, her lips a dab of red. She was handing out medicine while flirting with a customer, her eyes occasionally darting to the side. They met Wang Qing's gaze for a moment before quickly averting. This back-and-forth exchange of glances was like watching a theatrical performance. I munched on pine nuts, amused by the scene. Greenwen, ever well-informed, mentioned that Madame Chen had just married off her only daughter. With such a large estate and no heir, matchmakers were practically beating down her door, eager to propose marriages for her. Lu Yun emerged from the general store, dressed as a woman. She wore a blue cotton apron, her face heavy with worry, devoid of any festive cheer. One hand kept brushing a stray strand of hair from her temple. Wang Qing turned and saw her, snapping irritably, "What are you staring at? Go sort the goods in the back. Can't keep accounts, can't speak properly, what good are you? A maid is a maid, fit for nothing else." After enduring his sharp rebuke, Lu Yun shrank her neck, glancing nervously at Mrs. Chen next door before slowly retreating inside. Madame Chen must have heard it all. A smile played at the corners of her mouth as she clicked away at her abacus. She had studied at a private school and knew how to handle customers. Running this large shop single-handedly, she kept it bustling and thriving, an enviable sight. I shook my head. Where had Liu Yun's former shrewdness gone? If he clung tightly to his money, letting it flow steadily, he could have lived a better life. Instead, he opened this shop and poured all his capital out at once. Once this capital was moved around, it wouldn't be long before it vanished completely from the accounts. By then, when this cousin saw the shop next door, who knew what kind of face he'd make? The crowd finally dispersed, the carriage began to move, and soon all this was left behind. Regardless, she had sought this fate herself. Before I knew it, late spring arrived, and the wedding date drew near. Madame Lin made no further moves to harm me, proving that the opportunity from my past life was truly rare and unforeseeable. On the eve of my wedding, she, as my mother, solemnly instructed me on matters between men and women. Right before my eyes, she personally placed a scroll of erotic paintings at the bottom of my dowry chest, claiming it would ward off fire. I stared coldly at that scroll. When I was an unmarried maiden, such things could easily destroy my reputation and drive me to ruin. Now, on the eve of my marriage, she demanded I cast aside my shame and use this very thing to please my husband. I found it utterly laughable. Madame Lin spoke slowly. Tanger, married life is not like home. You must serve your in-laws diligently and obey your husband. Should he ever grow weary of you, your life will be filled with endless suffering. Her eyes darkened, as if she could see my suffering. Marriage is like drawing lots at a temple, fortune or misfortune, no one can tell. Even the fine young man father carefully selected might not like me. Madame Lin surely hopes I draw the worst lot, that he'll divorce me and return home, still falling into her grasp. A wave of disgust washed over me. I couldn't help thinking how much better it would be if I were a son. If mistreated by a stepmother, I could simply leave to make my fortune, casting these dark, filthy affairs far behind me, leaving her to rot in her own filth. But I am a woman. This world offers me no other path. After boarding the bridal sedan chair and paying respects to heaven and earth, I was escorted into the chamber. Candlelight flooded the room, casting a soft, rosy glow over everything in sight. Wei Yong'an stepped inside and gently lifted my veil. His eyes were clear and bright. His lips parted as if to speak, but instead, they curved into a warm smile. I unclenched my fists silently, thinking, he doesn't seem so bad after all. After drinking from the shared cup and lowering the crimson silk curtain, we exchanged childhood nicknames, smiled at each other, and gradually grew warm. Afterwards, Wei Yong'an let me rest my head on his arm, apologetically saying, I asked my elders to hasten the wedding date, thinking it would be more appropriate. I hope you won't hold it against me, Tanger. I yawned wearily. Before slipping into sleep, I heard him sigh softly. Thankfully, nothing went awry this time around. In my dream, Wei Yong'an wore a white robe, riding that snow-treading horse to my grave. He dismounted and wiped the rain from the tombstone with his sleeve. Afterward, he stood there for a long time, letting the wind and rain begin anew. So that's how it was. I suddenly understood, a smile curving my lips. I won the bet. Lady Lin must be terribly disappointed. On the third day after the wedding, Wei Yong'an and I paid our respects to our parents together. Madame Lin smiled as she helped us up, then casually asked, where are Linger and Ruer? Wei Yong'an glanced at me with confusion. We'd been inseparable these past days, and he hadn't noticed the names of the maids accompanying us. My two cousins, unaware of Mrs. Lin's intentions, had spent their time at the Wei residence simply eating, playing, embroidering, and making shoes with Luan. Whenever the young master entered, they'd rush to hide. Mrs. Lin whispered to him, those are the most delightful children. They're distant cousins of Tanger. My dear son-in-law, you must take good care of them. After speaking, she carefully studied my expression, as if afraid I might take offense. I frowned. This furtive behavior was utterly tiresome. Wei Yong'an flashed a knowing smile and gently took my hand in public. Madame Lin froze in place. Back home, Wei Yong'an formally recognized the two cousins and soon began arranging their marriages. Behind the screen, I met the two impoverished classmates Wei Yong'an had invited. Both were overjoyed. They said their aunt was truly kind, she'd sent them money from afar to bring them out of their hometown, exposed them to the world, treated them to fine food and drink, and even arranged their marriages. Back in the countryside, they'd never dared dream of marrying a scholar as a proper wife. I stifled a smile and nodded repeatedly, indeed, indeed. Mother is a kind-hearted soul. Remember to return for the post-wedding visit and pay your respects to her with a kowtow. I distributed the dowry to these two cousins. When the day of their return visit arrived, I returned to the Sierra residence ahead of time. While exchanging pleasantries with Lady Lin in the hall, a servant announced that the two cousins and their husbands had arrived. Madame Lin thought she must have misheard and asked where these cousin husbands had come from. Soon, two newlywed couples stood before her, bowing in unison. Madame Lin's face instantly turned ashen. Forcing a smile, she ordered jewelry brought forth and personally presented it to her two cousins. Then, claiming dizziness, she retired to her chambers without even inviting us to stay for supper. On the way back to the mansion, the carriage was suddenly blocked. Lu Yun, disheveled and filthy, emaciated, threw herself before the carriage. Waving both arms, she cried out repeatedly, "Miss! Miss! Save me!" A crowd gathered to watch the commotion. Wang Qing pushed through the crowd, grabbed her hair, and yanked her back. "You're out of your mind. You won't do your chores at home, so you come out here wailing like a mourner." Madame Chen stood arms folded, watching the scene with amusement. Honestly, she still thinks she's the mistress of the house. Ask her to wash a couple of garments for me, and she starts wailing like the world is ending. Whispers rippled through the crowd, and I soon pieced together the gist of what had transpired. Wang Qing's general store had been deserted for half a year. Seeing it was about to go under, he handed over the remaining goods to Madame Chen to offset the rent. Lu Yun made a scene at the door, shouting that Wang Qing and Madame Chen had conspired to swindle her money. She claimed that when she woke in the middle of the night, her husband was often not beside her, while the window of Madame Chen's house remained lit late into the night. Enraged, Wang Qing declared Lu Yun guilty of excessive jealousy and suspicion, a violation of the 7 grounds for divorce, and divorced her. He promptly became a son-in-law in Chen's family, taking over as the new proprietor of the herbal medicine shop. Chen reclaimed the general store. Having long exhausted her dowry and with nowhere else to go, Lu Yun had no choice but to swallow her pride and work at Chen's household. Months of torment had reduced her to her present state. In the standoff, Lu Yun suddenly wrenched Wang Qing's hand away, lunged forward, and clung desperately to the edge of the carriage, scrambling upward with all her might. The driver dared not wait longer. He lashed her hard with his whip. She cried out in pain and tumbled to the ground. The crowd recoiled in fright. Someone shouted, "Is that woman in the carriage really your former mistress? If so, you shouldn't stand by and watch her die." Lu Yun immediately began wailing, "Mistress! Mistress! For the sake of our sisterly bond, save my life. I'll be your servant forever." She kept banging her head against the carriage, soon drawing blood. Madame Chen laughed loudly. "So you started out as a servant girl, that's why you look down on us common folk." At these words, some people, perhaps realizing they too were considered common folk, began to drift away in small groups. But the carriage still couldn't move forward. The driver called out hesitantly from outside the curtain, "Madam, what should we do? Waiting any longer might cause trouble." I pondered for a moment and said, "Report it to the authorities." The constables arrived swiftly. Not only did they disperse the crowd, but they also carried Lu Yun, who remained kneeling on the ground refusing to rise, back to the Chen residence. She struggled fiercely, her nails leaving bloody marks on the constable's face. The pain made him hiss sharply, and his anger flared. He swung his hand back and struck her, "You shrew." Someone remarked, "This woman is so stubborn and unruly, she's no good." Before the carriage departed, I lifted the curtain and glanced back one last time. Lu Yun was covered in dust, her lips bitten until they bled, crimson blood trickling down. She glared fiercely at the direction the carriage vanished, her eyes filled with venomous hatred. Days later, Lu Yun rose at dawn, opened the Chen family shop door, tied a silk scroll to the beam, and hanged herself in plain view. Madame Chen, feeling cursed, soon attached herself to a military officer. Using his influence, she drove Wang Qing from the household. That day, Lu Yun handed me a letter. Opening it, I found a page of notes from a midwife, detailing the birth of a baby boy 5 years prior, the hour, location, and distinguishing features all recorded. The information came from a private investigator well known in the neighborhood. His fees were steep, but his actions swift. Before my marriage, I lived sheltered in my family's inner quarters, unaware such skilled individuals existed in the world. Hiring him to investigate my stepmother, he uncovered crucial details in just half a month. Madame Lin, the matriarch of the Xia household, indeed harbors secrets of her own. I tucked away the letter and glanced outside. The sky hung heavy, storm clouds gathering. The debts of my past life must now be settled. The next day dawned clear. I returned to the Xia residence to visit my father. He smiled and said, "Your mother and I discussed adopting a boy from the clan. This child is 5 years old, bright and charming, but orphaned, a pitiful soul. I think it's a good idea. Someone to carry on the family line, and after I pass, you'll have a maternal family to visit. Your mother will have support too." Since my marriage went smoothly, father felt Lady Lin had contributed greatly. These days, he trusted her more and more. I nodded in agreement and even helped father consult the almanac to select an auspicious date. On the day of the adoption, following Lady Lin's wishes, no guests were widely invited, only the closest relatives were present. The clan members had been reluctant to come in the first place. They had pondered the adoption for a long time, and the opportunity had unexpectedly fallen to a distant orphaned relative, leaving them deeply dissatisfied. Father led the boy in burning incense and kneeling before our ancestors. Then, holding him, he pressed the child's handprint onto the adoption document. Afterward, the boy presented tea first to father, then to mother. Steward Uncle Sue stood behind father, his eyes glistening with tears. Madame Lin's face flushed crimson, her hands trembled so much when she took the tea she nearly dropped it. Watching this scene of family reunion, I nearly softened my heart. Uncle Sue had served our household for many years. In his youth, he stood tall and graceful, his spirit vibrant. His fingers flew over the abacus beads with such speed that even the bookkeeper felt outmatched. The maids and matrons of the household always greeted him with smiles and playful banter. His respectful and dependable nature made him the mistress's right-hand man. Whenever her good-for-nothing brother came begging for handouts, it was always he who sent him away. He served the Xia household faithfully for years as steward, yet never married. This ultimately caused his mother to die of grief. "Sister, tea." A child's clear voice rang in my ears. I took the tea he offered, sipped it, set the cup on the table, then pulled out a silk handkerchief. "Let me wipe the sweat from your neck," I said with a smile. Gently parting the fabric at the nape of his neck, I found a pigeon egg-sized red birthmark. Under Lady Lin's alarmed gaze, I slowly produced the page of notes. Lewin stepped forward, presenting a swaddling cloth. The fabric bore a unique pattern and was exceptionally soft, a gift from one of father's old friends brought back from abroad years ago. The child cried out in delight, reaching for the small blanket. "This is mine." Father looked utterly bewildered. I said coldly, "Mother, why didn't you tell father this is your own flesh and blood?" Lady Lin bit her lip, her body trembling uncontrollably. She shouted, "You dare make such slanderous accusations based on a single page of paper and a piece of cloth? I took pity on this child and cared for him since his birth. What's wrong with that?" My tone remained calm. 5 years ago, you suffered from a stomach ailment for a time, often lying listless in bed. When I came to see you, you claimed to fear catching the illness and avoided me. When spring brought warmer weather, you went to the country estate to recuperate, staying a full month. I was still deeply attached to her then, writing her letters constantly, so I remember it all clearly. Madame Lin began to weep, sobbing, "Young miss, how could you say such things? I've never wronged you these years. You're making baseless accusations, tarnishing my honor, driving me to my death." She glanced at father's expression, but he showed no intention of stopping me. I continued, "It was your misfortune. Your brother wanted to beat up Steward Sue, so he secretly followed him and saw him visiting you and the child. That man will say anything for money and wine. We can audit the accounts. Over the years, Uncle Sue embezzled silver to silence him, rigging the books countless times. The midwife can also testify, she'd recognize this child's mother the moment she saw her." My father suppressed his rage, glaring at Sue the steward. "Is this true?" Sue the steward froze for a moment, then suddenly drew a dagger and pressed it against my father's throat, shouting harshly, prepare the carriage. Let us go. The child, terrified, began wailing and clung desperately to Lady Lin's legs. But I was prepared. Archers lay in ambush on the roof, and one arrow pierced his palm. He knelt down in agony. My father spun around, pressing his sword against Sue's throat. The child's wails grew louder. Sue glanced over, forcing a smile as he cooed softly, "Baby, don't be afraid. It's okay." Before he could finish, he lunged forward. The sword blade pierced his own throat, blood slowly trickling out. Madame Lin shrieked, clutching the child as she collapsed to the floor. The adulterer was dead, leaving no witness. He had sacrificed his life to protect Lady Lin. I stood frozen for a moment, then slowly knelt down and closed his wide, staring eyes. I remembered when I was young, one lantern festival he took me out. He paid for sugar sculptures for me to eat and let me ride on his shoulders to watch the fireworks. If I could choose, I'd wish to remain the carefree young miss of the Xia household forever. I'll never know if Uncle Sue was involved when Mrs. Lin killed me all those years ago. Mrs. Lin crawled over. Holding Steward Sue, she murmured, "Wealth and status clouded my judgment. I betrayed you. The spy told me they'd been lovers in their youth." My father withdrew his sword, its tip pressed against the ground, his expression heavy with sorrow. "Why did you commit such a shameful act, harming others and yourself?" Madame Lin froze for a moment, then staggered to her feet, her bloodied hand clutching his sleeve. She asked earnestly, "If you despised me, why did you marry me?" I came to my cousin's bedside to tend to her medicine, with no ulterior motives. "I've always seen you, my brother-in-law, behave with propriety. You weren't compelled to marry me. My family is poor, my brother is lazy, and I never took anything from the Xia household to support them. When they were starving and couldn't afford rice, I only sold my own jewelry. All these years, I only hoped the master would look at me with respect." She shook her head and continued, "It was useless. Master, you wouldn't even enter my room. You favored concubine Zhou more than me, perhaps because she bore a slight resemblance to my cousin Shirong." She smiled bitterly, then turned to me. "Xia Tang, Miss Xia. You are truly clever, uncovering everything. I don't know why you hate me so much. I've never harmed you. Xia Tang, you must be feeling quite triumphant now, the mistress of the Duke of Wei's household, with such a noble and distinguished husband. But, young mistress, until your final breath, you'll never know what hardships life may bring. A woman's life always depends on men, but can men truly be relied upon?" She lowered her voice, glanced at the child by her side, and said bitterly, "I beg you, give this child a morsel to eat." Then she turned and plunged the dagger into her own heart. The child of Lady Lin and Steward Sue, having witnessed the bloody scene, fell into a high fever from the shock. After the fever broke, though his life was saved, he became dull and vacant. Overnight, his father seemed to age 10 years, his hair and beard turning white. He often asked me, was it all my fault? I always remained silent. He named the child Dongbao and personally cared for him. Dongbao bore a striking resemblance to Steward Sue, a round face, broad forehead, and handsome features. His eyes held no guile, clear as water. 10 years after Lady Lin's death, her curse had yet to take effect. I had a son and a daughter, and my relationship with Wei Yonglin remained good. Lu Wen still hadn't married. She said she was content managing the household by my side, living a clear and uncomplicated life, and had no desire to pair up with any man. I arranged for her younger brother to leave the Xia household. He opened his own shop, married, and lived with his elderly mother. Lu Wen often visited them. One day, returning home, she kneaded glutinous rice balls while mentioning something to me. "Miss, do you remember Lu Yun and her cousin? My brother said that cousin now ekes out a living near the city god temple. That area is full of laborers, and he mingles among them. Somehow, he's contracted scabies all over his body and clearly won't live much longer." Madame Chen, however, has been blessed. She bore that military officer a son. How unpredictable life's twists and turns are. When that cousin beat Lu Yun in the street, he surely never imagined his own fate. She shook her head with a sigh. I gazed quietly at the teacup in my hand. The emerald tea leaves rose and fell within the white porcelain vessel, much like the ebb and flow of human existence. The end.